Today on the Sick Podcast, Montreal Canadiens assistant coach Alex Burrows says too easy to put the blame on one guy and rather unfair. He also talked about some young players in the organization. Darren Dreger on That's Hockey says there are only two untouchables on the Montreal Canadiens, and what are the priorities for Jeff Gordon and Kent Hughes between now and trade deadline day. Sick Podcast coming up.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro. The sickest Montreal Canadiens podcast. Sports entertainment like no other. Brought to you by 8.6, Intense by Nature.
It's the Sick Podcast, and you can follow us on all our social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, at the Sick Podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's absolutely for free, and you'll be notified on all the social media platforms if you want, and click on Notify Me. Every time we upload an episode, you'll be notified right away, so you can watch it and listen to it right away. Joining me now from Global TV Montreal, it's always a lot of fun to talk Habs with Brian Wild. Brian, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
You're very, very welcome. It's nice to see you again. You look like you're in fine form. All right, so I want to start with this. Montreal Canadiens assistant coach Alex Burrows spoke with one of our friends, Jean-François Chaumont of Le Journal de Montréal, and he talked about Dominic Ducharme. Let's get it up on the screen if we can. Une année rock and roll, a rock and roll year. Retour sur sa première année comme adjoint à Montréal. He talks about his first year as assistant with Montreal. And he says, quote, c'est difficile de placer le blâme sur une seule personne. It's difficult to place the blame on only one person. C'est là que je trouve ça injuste envers Dom. It's there that I find it's unfair towards Dominic Ducharme. Brian? For those who are blaming Dominic Ducharme and saying ultimately the team not performing falls on his shoulders because it's his responsibility to get them going, do you agree or disagree with Alex Burrows?
Well, I agree with Alex, certainly in terms of that it never should fall just on the shoulders of one person. I mean, there have been a ton of things that have happened this season. There have been a injury list longer than any injury list I've ever seen. There's been COVID that's taken most of the lineup out. Out of the 48 contracts that the team has, I think it's something like 34 of them were out at one time. So yeah, I mean, obviously you can't put it just on Dom. The wording such as it is, yeah, I'll defend Dom, but only with that wording. On an overall point of view, I don't think he's shown me anything that I really like. I don't like the way the team plays. I don't like the way they take to the ice. I'm looking forward to what Gordon and Hughes said about starting to find some offensive hockey one day. That's what I want to see. I want a superstar that can score some goals and get me out of my seat. That's what we want right now. And Dom has nothing to do with that this year, but that's the long term. And I don't think he has the tools to take the Canadiens forward. What do you think? You think he's got the tools to take the Canadiens forward?
No, I don't. And I say, embrace the tank, Brian.
I love it. Absolutely.
All right. Okay. But having said all of that, there are some who thought that this week, with the Canadiens having a bye week and the All-Star game going this weekend, that it was an opportune time for the Canadiens to relieve Dominic Ducharme of his duties so that you get someone else in. He sits down with Kent Hughes and with Jeff Gordon. They discuss their plan, how they want to get some guys going, how they want to play between now and the end of the year. Were you on that school of thought that Dominic Ducharme, this was the opportune time to relieve him of his duties? You're nodding no, so I guess not.
Not even close. I mean, it's mission accomplished. I mean, they're trying to tank. You just said it. Embrace the tank. So when you see your teams facing over 50 shots per game, you're doing the ultimate for the general management. The coach is coming through in flying colors when you're facing 55 shots. And why wouldn't they go get a goalie? They're getting 750 goaltending, Tony, in the last 5 games. 750. They're not in the hunt for a goalie. Your hoodie says it all.
Yeah.
Embrace the tank. And they're embracing it. They're embracing it by keeping the coach there that's allowing 50-shot games. They're embracing it by keeping goaltenders in there that aren't stopping shots at better than a 750 percentage. Everybody knows what's going on here. You got a slight injury? Get out of the lineup. I don't want to see you. Your ankle hurts? Fantastic. Sit over there.
Brian, I agree with you 1,000%. Okay. So, and I know that if there was 3 games left in the season, they're 2 points out of a playoff spot. Someone with an injury is coming back in the lineup. Right now, it's like, okay, take your time, your rehab. Oh, a setback in your rehab. Oh, that's too bad. Let's start all over again. Some people, though, are probably listening and or watching, and they're saying, well, no, it can't be. But it can. This is the reality of the situation right now.
And I'll tell you what, let me very quickly add here that the only people that aren't involved are the players on the ice. They're trying to win every night. Don't get me wrong.
100%.
I'm not ever suggesting that any player would be told or any player would ever behave in such a manner that they wouldn't put their heart on the line to the fullest extent. This is about the little things that management can do in terms of who's in the lineup and when the trainers say, oh, he's got that knock and he shouldn't play. But when they get on the ice, if you're going to tell Brendan Gallagher to just ease it off a notch, that's not going to go well. And they would never, ever say that.
And but management thinks that. Take a look at Brian Flores. I mean, it's still proven to be true. We'll find out. But he claims that the owner of the Miami Dolphins told him, tank the season. And you know what? I'll give you a pretty nice bonus if you do. Now, he didn't want to. And, of course, we can understand that. All right, now.
All right, but the players weren't involved in that, Tony.
No, they weren't. Of course, no.
And the players will never be involved in that. I'm just saying that there are subtle things that management can do to make sure that they can embrace the tank. 750 goaltending, keep the coach in there allowing over 50 shots per game. Anybody who's got a minor injury, you don't play through it. Why would you? Makes no sense. Like, very quickly, when I look at Carey Price and his age and his injury profile, why would you play him this season? These games mean nothing. If he has only a limited amount of physical ability left in that knee, in that body, well, don't waste that limited amount of physical ability on a lost season. Wouldn't make any sense.
Unless some will say they want to play him so if he can still show what he can do,
absolutely.
Then maybe you can move him. But having said that, if they're not a very good team this year, I don't want to put Carey in this situation. I'll get Carey back in there when they actually have a better team and they'll play better in front of them. Now, JF Chaumont, also with Alex Burrows. Alex Burrows talked about the young players. This is what he had to say. Quand tu regardes pour du long terme, when you take a look at long term, tu dois construire avec tes jeunes. You have to build with the young players. Je pense à Suzuki, Caulfield et Romanov. I think of Suzuki, Caulfield and Romanov. Ensuite, il y a les Evans, Paling, Goulet, Norlinder, Vedamo et Harvey Pinard. Afterwards, there is the Evans, the Palings, the Goulets, the Norlinders, the Vedamos, and the Harvey Pinards of this world. Souvent, tu veux construire avec ton noyau jeune. Often, you want to build with a young core. You know why I'm pulling up this quote, Brian? I'll tell you why. Because I think there's something very interesting that comes out of this. Long story short, in Alex Burrows' world, at the least, and it all could also be in Dom Ducharme's world, and maybe even in Gordon and Hughes' world, but in Alex Burrows' world, Alex Burrows sees a guy like Vedamo and a guy like Harvey Pinard playing here on the fourth line and being part of a young core. Now, it might not be next year. It might be the year after that. But it just goes to show you that in Alex Burrows' world, it's not the Armias at 3.4 or the Byrons that are making the same money or Lehkonen who's up for a raise that will get over $3 million. You would think that would occupy a fourth line. It would be more the Vedamos and the Harvey Pinards of this world. Is that the same read that you have?
Well, the read I get there for sure is he sees a big rebuild. Because if you see a player like Harvey Pinard and Vedamo actually being in the National Hockey League, it means the Montreal Canadiens have unloaded a lot of players.
You're 100% right.
He sees a big rebuild. That's what he sees. And without saying it. I mean, it's the same thing as when Hughes said something to the effect of, well, Petrie's 34. Just the fact that he says that means that he's thinking this is a big rebuild and it's going to take some time. You don't say Petry's 34 if you think next season you're back at it and competitive and vying for the cup. So, and there's a second moment where we can extrapolate and read between the lines that the organization sees a pretty long rebuild, because I don't think those two players that were mentioned are NHL players, but they would be NHL players on a poor team that's unloaded a lot of high salary.
And if the Canadiens are going to rebuild and they're going to trade away some of these veterans who are some of your favorite players, well, when they end up with a new team, you can pick up their jersey at sportbuffshop.com for all of your officially licensed sports apparel and even our sick merchandise, like Embrace the Tank. Use code SICK15 for 15% off on all of their items at sportbuffshop.com. All right, okay. TSN hockey insider Darren Dreger tells That's Hockey that the Habs have only 2 untouchables on the team. They are Suzuki and Caulfield. Brian Wild, are you surprised it's not 3 untouchables and that Alexander Romanov's name was not there?
Absolutely. Yeah, completely surprised by that. I'm going to say something here, though, that, being on television live, as I've been for, 35 years, Darren, in listening to that, I felt that there was an and others there a little bit, and only the 2 names readily came to mind. I mean, you're off the top of your head, and I'm not suggesting Darren doesn't know the lineup. Darren knows the lineup. Darren knows the NHL. He's brilliant. But sometimes in the heat of the moment, you can forget a name. And I wonder if he could revisit that, he would put Romanov on it. But I think on the overall, it is interesting, and it does tell us that it's a giant rebuild. And the crux of what Darren is saying to me is there's nobody safe, really, except for, young, we've got great hope in you, and you're undervalued. And you're our core for the future, which is 2 names or 3 names. But I certainly don't see Romanov getting traded. I mean, not a chance.
Well,
but
he would not be on the list of your priorities, you would think. And once again, you're kind of right when you are right when you say Romanov is it's less of a sexier player than a Caulfield or a Suzuki, who are offensive players. One's a playmaking centerman. One's a guy who's led his team in scoring at every level, with the exception of this season, of course. It's easier to remember those guys. I mean, in Romanov's case, I wouldn't see any reason why they would be looking to trade him. He's still on an entry-level contract. He's young. He hits like a tank. He's been getting better as the season has been progressing. There's a lot of youthful enthusiasm there. He looks like a guy who's happy to play in Montreal. So, I would agree with you on that. All right, okay. So now that we talked about, I brought up the word priority, Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon, between now and trade deadline, where lie the priorities?
Well, priority number 1 is you got to get rid of a lot of money, a lot of graph. I mean, this is a lineup that Marc Bergevin just gave a lot of money to aging players and underachievers. And I don't know how many you're going to get rid of, but I mean, I think that they would like to lose. If they could, I think they'd like to lose 10 players if they could.
Wow. Between now and the deadline?
If they could. I mean, they can't. Obviously, they can't, but they'd sure like to. I mean, how many would you like in the future of the D-Corps? How many?
Well,
Edmondson,
if you're good,
Romanov.
So on the premise that you cannot trade everyone, you just can't. And on the premise that
I've just traded 4 defensemen, Tony, if I could, and I've kept 2, Edmondson and Romanov. The rest, if they could trade them, if they could find buyers, they would take buyers. You wouldn't want to trade Savard at that contract? Of course you would. Petry doesn't want to be here anymore.
Yeah.
Restrictions in Canada are too much. 34 years of age in a rebuild, as much as you like the player. And you could get high first rounder for him, for sure. I think.
Sherratt's a UFA, and he's going to go.
Sherratt's a UFA.
Usually don't get better after
UFA.
30.
Weidman's just chaff. I mean, so I just traded 5, and I haven't even done forward yet. So, 10, sure, if you could, but he can't, obviously.
So you brought up Edmondson's name, and I'm happy that you did, because You know, a lot of hockey people will tell you that you can't just put together a team of young players. You need to have older players to show them the way.
Absolutely.
And those older players, for the most part, the ones who are usually kind of content, if they're happy where they are, and of course everyone wants to win. That's a foregone conclusion. But I take a look at players who have won the Stanley Cup. I take a look at Jake Allen. I take a look at Joel Edmondson. I take a look at Tyler Toffoli. These three players, there's no doubt that they'd rather win. But if they like it here and they're happy here, those are not players that, you know, I'm thinking of trading. You need veterans on every team. You need guys to show other people the way. And I think these are three very good leaders to show the rest of the guys the way. So I'm in no hurry to trade Edmondson. I'm in no hurry to trade Toffoli. As a matter of fact, both of those guys could have a letter on my team, and one of those guys might end up being the captain. Might.
For me, I'll look at it from an age point of view. Like the blue line, I've already said how I feel about that. From a forward point of view, I think if your age starts with a 3, you're too old. It's as simple as that. Like you might be an extremely valuable player that can still, you know, do some things in the NHL and still contribute. But if you start with a 3, being a forward, where I think anybody who's a student of the game understands that defensemen last longer than forwards, and the regression has already begun, usually at 28, 29 in a forward. So if they're starting with a 3, by the time you're good, you know, you're 33. So you got to go. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and if you're folks, if you're planning on, and we appreciate all the texts, but if you're planning on texting us about the Bergerons and the Ovechkins of this world, it's safe to say that those are World Cup class players, and those are exceptions. And the Canadians don't have a Bergeron or an Ovechkin. Okay, so we can understand why they're not slowing down. All right. So on that note, the wingers, that's their position of strength. They have depth there at the wing position. So if you're going to look to trade players, you're going to look to trade players who are wingers to try and shore up other positions. And you said if the player's age starts with a 3, those are the players that you would think are going to get traded. What if his age number starts with a 2, but a lot of people think he's actually 3 years older because of all the abuse that he's taken over the years? I'm talking about 29-year-old Brendan Gallagher. Where do you stand with him?
Well, I mean, I love him as a competitor, of course, and he belongs in the National Hockey League still. But, I mean, let's be honest here. For what the Canadians are bringing in the next 3 years, I'm not sure. It pains me to say it, though. I mean, it's like the one guy I'm like, I don't want to have to say this, Tony. Don't make me say this about Brendan Gallagher, that he might not be perfect for, you know, this reconstruction. But he might not be.
So you move forward with Josh Anderson?
Excuse me. Well, and then it becomes a numbers game, right? Because I do like Josh Anderson a lot. I like Lehkonen. The rumor is he could fetch a first, Tony. How do you not take a first? But he's still a great hockey player. So that's a tricky one. You just mentioned Toffoli. I love Toffoli. But if, you've created this team where you're 3 deep on the wings, like we haven't mentioned Drouin yet, and Gallagher and Toffoli and Anderson and Lehkonen, and you know, like you're doing really well on the wings, but that was always Bergeron's trouble, right?
Is it safe to say
you don't construct a winner from the wings?
You don't.
If you feel you got too much strength on the wings and absolutely none at center, I mean, you know what you got to do, right? You know what you got to do.
Yeah, for sure. Is it safe to say that Jonathan Drouin, whose contract is up, not at the end of this season, but at the end of next season, which was a 6-year deal that paid him $33 million, 5.5 per year times 6 years. Is it safe to say that Jonathan Drouin will not end up signing an extension with the Canadians, and he will be somewhere else within a year and a half?
I don't know. I don't have a clue on that one. What do you think?
They'll re-sign Drouin?
Well, I mean, obviously, you may re-sign him in terms of a lower price for him. I mean, he's not done as a hockey player.
No.
Okay, so I mean, if you can get the right price and the right term, why wouldn't you try? If he wants to play.
I could tell you that in the off season last year, you know, not sure if it was he was given the option if he wanted to leave Montreal, they were going to try and accommodate him, and he chose to
And
stay.
that makes sense.
And he chose to stay, which is admirable, by the way.
Right, sure, but I mean, what's the new management think there?
I don't think the type of player that he is falls in line with what the new management wants to do.
What do you think the new management wants to do, Tony?
Well, they'll never say it, but I think the new management.
Well, that's why you're here.
Correct. I think the new management is okay that if this team loses more often than not over the next couple of years and puts themselves in a position where they can have a top 5 pick and, number 1 in 2023 would be pretty cool, or 2. Nobody would complain. But having said that, even though I think they would be okay with losing their share of games, I do believe that they want to try and implement a culture where the guys are going to work. Like in their world, they work really, really hard and they lose 3-1. They work really, really hard and they lose 4-2. They don't lose giving up 6, 7, 8 all the time, but they work really, really hard trying to build something before you get there. That's what I think. And, that's what I think the vision is going to be for the next year and a half at the very least.
Okay, let me turn the tables on you, and I'm going to ask a question. You started this segment with priorities, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to prioritize who they want to trade.
Yes.
And I'm going to start it off for you. Number 1, the priority list is obvious because he's a UFA, is Ben Sherratt. You would not disagree with that. So give me your number 2 through 5.
I think number 1 is Jeff Petrie.
Come on, one's a UFA. Come on.
I totally understand. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, everyone knows that they're going to trade Ben Sherratt, but Jeff Petrie doesn't want to be here, and he's got 3 years left.
Okay, let's not quibble. Okay, we'll switch our 2s and our 1s around.
Okay,
he's my 2, he's your 1.
So let's do a 1A and a 1B. Petrie, Sherratt. Number 3. I mean, it leads me to believe, with the logic of unrestricted free agent, that they're going to take a look at who they have as unrestricted free agents and decide whether they want to bring them back or not. Because if they're not, why lose them for nothing, right?
Right. So Brett Kulak be number 3?
Brett Kulak, Matthew Perreault, and Cedric Paquette. Now, as well as I do, they're probably not going to be able to get much for Perreault and Paquette. But if we already know that they're not going to be back, well, whatever you can get, you can get. If it's a 7, it's a 7. Okay.
Absolutely. When Benning in Vancouver said, I didn't think about getting anything for that guy, and he was a UFA, but it's like, holy crap, is this guy a GM saying that?
Yeah.
That's brutal. You take what you can get. Even if it's a 6, you take a 6. Okay, I'm going to keep going then because that was too easy. Now do your 6 through 10. It's going to get a little harder here. We've got rid of all of our UFAs. And Jeff Petrie, Julie's in the U.S. and he wants to join her. Keep going.
Brendan Gallagher.
Wow, that's your number 6.
Well, that's, I'm going with, and Carey Price, obviously. I'm going with Gallagher, Petrie, and Price. They're going to try to move. The contracts are too long and the contracts are too much. And then Sherratt and the Paquettes and the Perreaults of this world, and maybe Kulak, because I'm not so sure. They might want to bring Kulak back, but those are the players that I think would be first. But don't get me wrong. If they could find a taker for Hoffman or Drouin, I don't think they think twice.
All right, and Armia too. If you're going to put the Price contract in a grouping and a Gallagher contract in a grouping, and your Armia contract has to be in the same group, right?
Yeah, 3.4
overvalued guy doing
obviously nothing. Yeah, they don't like that contract either.
Right. Okay, so they're moving on from that one too.
You could be right. Now they might want to move 10 players.
There you go. Okay, now let's go to the final group. The one, because this is fun.
Yeah.
Let's go to the final group, and that would be the players more on the cusp in terms of what they want to do in a rebuild. And I think these ones I think are a little harder. Like a Hoffman, for example.
Yeah.
Just signed, has some good games. Toffoli, play here, been a really good performer. Anderson, a really good performer. a certain style of player that the team hasn't had for a very long time. So he fits into a mold that not many do. So where are we on those guys?
This is it's a really good
Drouin
question
too, right? Because
so
one
category
way you could say they got too many wingers. So can you keep all of them?
So category 1, Petrie, Sherratt, Price, big contracts. Category
Come on, don't
2.
forget Armia.
Armia
in that mix too, remember?
And Gallagher. And then there's
so that's 5 guys already.
And then there's category 2, the guys that are UFA. And then there's category 3,
that's 9.
Hoffman and Drouin are in that category. I don't think Josh Anderson is. I think they want to keep Josh Anderson here for several years.
Yeah. What about Lehkonen? He's in there. I mean, people are rumoring him as a first-round fetch.
Yeah, but that's okay if that first round you're going to get ends up playing in the National Hockey League.
Yes, absolutely. No argument there.
Well, and it's okay if, you're trading him to a team that, then again, okay, who's going to want Lehkonen? A team that believes they need a kind of player like him to be very competitive in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So now that pick ends up becoming a pick after 20.
Right. And after 20, you get into a 50-50 chance of finding an NHL player.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, if Lehkonen wants a 3-year deal at 2.75 per season,
that's how I'd approach Lehkonen.
I'd bring him back.
If I'm used, that's how I approach
a 3-year deal at $10 million.
Yeah.
3.33.
It'd go like this. You ready for it, Tony?
Yeah.
You watching me? It'd go like this. Hi, Arturi. Welcome to my office. I'm Kent Hughes. So anyway, we're doing a house cleaning, but we really like you. And we want to find out if you would take 3 years at about 3 per. And if you would, or that's close, let's negotiate. And if that doesn't sound good to you, any preference on where you'd like to go? Because that's how I would do it.
So you would be comfortable. So where do you see Lehkonen going forward? Third line?
Well, when they're bad in the next 2 years, he's going to be on the second line or the first line.
If he's on the second line at $3 million, you don't have a problem with it.
Exactly. I don't have a problem with it. I mean, everybody knows I love Lehkonen. I never really, ever had an issue with him.
Brian, let's clarify. If someone is just going to join us right now and they're hearing you say Arturi Lehkonen on a second line, they're probably pulling their hair. But let's backtrack for a second here.
You're absolutely right.
It's
because there's no one else. That's
you and I believe that there's going to be a major house cleaning here, and a lot of wingers, if they could, are probably going to find themselves off. In an ideal world, you would think that they would trade a Gallagher from the wing, a Drouin from the wing, a Hoffman from the wing, and now all of a sudden you're left, and maybe even an Armia from the wing. So now you're left with a Toffoli on the wing, you're left with a Caulfield on the wing, but you're not left with much else on the wing. So that's why you say
the fourth guy. Yeah,
you could see a Lehkonen on a second line within a year from now. I get it. I got it. All right, Marinaro for matrixhomefitness.ca. As I'm trying to lose some pounds, the Canadians are trying to shed some weight off of their salary, and you can bring it home. I think I'm a king when it comes to this stuff, by the way. Discover a club quality workout in the comfort of your own home. Visit matrixhomefitness.ca and get a treadmill like mine, the Matrix T75 with XUR console. Brian?
Yeah.
I'll end it with this. If you had the number 1 pick overall, and I know that you and I don't make a living of watching all the junior players play hockey, but we do talk to a lot of people and we do get a lot of information. If the draft was tonight and you had the number 1 pick, can you tell me with certainty that it would be Shane Wright?
I can. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I understand he's not having an amazing year, but he's still the number 1 pick. I've talked to a couple of people that say it's not a lock, but I mean, he's still a lock for me.
Yeah.
Is he a lock for you still?
Well, I bring it up because I saw that there was one independent service about 3 or 4 days ago, which the name escapes me right now, so I apologize for that. But I saw it on Daily Faceoff that they have Logan Cooley in the number 1 spot right now.
Yeah, I saw that.
And Wright is at number 2, so he's been dethroned. But I say this, and I could be wrong. Shane Wright plays in a league where he hadn't played hockey for a year and a half. Mm-hmm. And to just think that he was going to just pick up and go and take off, it takes a while. And he's starting to find his rhythm. As a matter of fact, he started to find it about 2 weeks ago. I believe that when the draft takes place in 2023, whichever team has the number 1 pick, I believe they will draft Shane Wright.
And quickly, having followed the draft for a lot of years, this month, February, is always the flirt with the other guys month. It takes the same pattern every single year. There's a lock, and then everybody gets bored with saying the lock is this guy. And then February rolls around and it's now flirt with a new guy month.
And the number one
by
guy
April, it goes back to lock.
Yeah.
And then a week before the draft, they throw out it could be this guy a little bit. And then it was the lock guy all along that goes first. Yeah. It's the same pattern every year where people play around.
Yeah.
Got to keep it interesting, right?
Yeah, the number 1 guy ends up being the guy that he actually was in September when the season had started. You're right about that. Hey, always fun. Let's do it again, okay?
My pleasure. Thanks for the time today.
I always love talking Habs with you. Look at him. He's wearing his Montreal Canadiens red. Isn't he a beauty? Brian Wild from Global TV, and this is a beauty too. It's a Sick Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at the Sick Podcast. Be notified when we upload a recent episode, and follow us on YouTube at the Sick Podcast. This podcast is sick. Tell your friends about it. Cheers. And sharing is caring. Ciao for now. See you, Brian.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. The Sick Podcast is brought to you by 8.6, Intense by Nature.